Hey guys, welcome back. We're really glad to see you again. It's been far too long. Where you been? Who else you seeing? You watching too much iDubbbz? We're gonna get straight into this review today. We're really excited to talk about this movie. But first, a couple quick announcements. We are honored and privileged to say that we've surpassed 200 subscribers, and that is all thanks to people like you. Less than 6 months ago, when I started this channel talking about movies from the Loft Film Festival in my office, I really had no idea where this was going, what we were looking to do with this channel, but it's kind of coming into its own, and it's all thanks to people like you. So we're excited to pay back that trust with some new projects here over the next few months, not just reviews, but short films, sketches, documentary things, fun stuff, keeping you appraised, keeping you in the loop. Also, it's been a bit of a long day, and this is a quick tangent. My girlfriend, who I've talked about many times on this show, has just a bottomless compassion and love for people and animals, and she, a few years ago, took in 3 cats with feline HIV and cancer. These are the kind of cats that I think most people would walk right past in a shelter, and if not for her, they would have been put down. Unfortunately, after several years, one of her cats today, Kittyberto, had to be euthanized. So it's been a long day, and my heart goes out to her and to Kittyberto watching and probably making fun of me from the sky. So those things out of the way, we're back, and we're excited to talk about a new film. Something good, but extremely wicked, shockingly vile, and evil. I'm sure I got that in the wrong order. It's a lot of adjectives. And I know vile comes at the end because they just kind of tack it on. So it's extremely wicked, shockingly evil, and vile.
I don't know what to say.
So before I get into this film, real quick, I want to answer a question that I've seen kind of debated around, not just with this new movie, but with other serial killer films and true crime kind of films. And it's the question that asks, why are we making this film, and what is the line between creating a piece of art and really celebrating the life of a horrible person? I don't really think that it's immediate that by making a film about somebody like Ted Bundy that you're celebrating them or putting them in a good light. I think some films can do it really well, some films can do it really bad. And when you're really trying to create an empathetic character, you're walking a fine line here. I mean, I think to really get me invested in a movie that's not a documentary, you do need to paint the totality of a person. And that doesn't always mean that you're defending them or making them seem like a good person. And we talked about In the House That Jack Built with Matt Dillon, which I still think is a masterpiece by Lars von Trier, a film at which the first act or so almost makes light of the horrible events that this fictitious serial killer is committing, these horrible crimes. And in a sense, he's getting us to laugh with the character, laugh at the actions, so that we're kind of on board, we're complicit in those events and those crimes, so that when things get really horrible and really ugly, we've really seen the development of this character, and we can kind of understand that person, if not feel for them. And that's something that I think every film should learn from, and that buzzing noise is finally gone. I think we're off to a good start here. There have been many movies about Ted Bundy, and there have been many movies about other serial killers. People like Ed Gein, for instance, have been completely cemented in the legacy of film through movies like Psycho and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which took aspects of his life and his crimes and immortalize them. In this newest film, Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile, I got it that time, this is a movie by Joe Berlinger, who also did the Ted Bundy tapes last year. And if you didn't see it, it's a pretty good documentary series talking about Ted Bundy's relationship with these documentarians and just sort of how manipulative and what a pathological liar this person was. You might also know it because everybody on Facebook for about a week was talking about how pretty Ted Bundy was. And I'm gonna get this out of the way real quick. Maybe I'm just not seeing it. I promise I'm not that vain, but just think he looked kind of like a basic white guy. I just don't really see it. But he was definitely with a lot of charm and charisma, and that was part of how he was able to take advantage of so many unfortunate victims. And this film, I'm not going to say the title again, really delves into an aspect of Ted Bundy that we haven't particularly explored before in film. And I got to say, this to me was one of the biggest successes of this movie. When we sat down to watch it, we had a discussion up front about how we weren't really sure we could watch another Ted Bundy film. There have been so many done, his story is so well known, and so many aspects of his life have been glamorized that it's really tough to sit down and say, let's give a new one a different look, and hopefully they do something new and creative and innovative. And this film certainly does. It's based on a book from Ted Bundy's ex-fiancée, talking about kind of her relationship with him, and exploring especially not just her roller coaster of emotions when he was first captured, going on trial, and more of his crimes were coming out in the media and from law enforcement, but sort of her realization that she herself was a victim and kind of coming to grips with the fact that she was sharing a house, including a house with her young child, with somebody that is inarguably one of the 20th century's greatest monsters. So the film starts out in a very unique space, really just getting into Ted and his relationship with his fiancée. And one of the first things the film does, and it is a credit to Zac Efron, who I think does a good job, but I'll get into that later, it really shows more of who he is outside of the crimes. It doesn't show a lot of the murders, it doesn't get into a lot of the dark spaces of Ted Bundy until near the very end, and even then it sort of pulls back a lot of what I expected anyway. And it shows who this person was and why somebody would be drawn to him, and you can't help but empathize with his fiancée. Most of the film, of course, plays out after he's first captured and apprehended, and through the several trials he goes through, and sort of just following this duplicitous character as he's becoming more and more desperate and realizing that the noose is getting ever tighter. And so for those of you who don't know about Ted Bundy, spoiler, he gets caught and executed, what's really interesting is that period where he's not only on trial, but escapes for several months and commits more murders. I mean, it is something like out of a Hollywood movie. And when we talk about why we're putting somebody like this on film, unfortunately, we have to realize that people are fascinated by things that are out of the ordinary, things that seem too ridiculous to be real. And serial killers definitely check that box. This is somebody on a prolonged period committing horrible, horrible crimes and outthinking, or at least outlasting law enforcement. And it makes a lot of sense why this is something people want to see and learn more about. And I think in some weird way, everybody goes through that period in life where they're kind of fascinated by the lives of serial killers, partially because we're terrified of them. And we like to learn about things that scare us so they can become a little bit less like boogeymen and more just stories. And Ted Bundy is one of the more interesting stories, particularly because he is so charismatic. He's somebody who's renowned for his horrible outbursts with the media, for his escape attempts, and for his outbursts in court where he attempts to defend himself. And so it does make sense to me, and I completely understand why people would want to make so many movies about him. The real question was, well, it starts out in an interesting place. Does it contribute something unique and informative about Ted Bundy? And does it succeed in doing what I talked about earlier, which is exploring who he is as a person without making him somebody that we are meant to feel as if we should empathize with? Something the film goes out of its way to do at several points, and especially during the end credits, which I actually found rather tasteful, is focus more on the victims, focus more on the investigations, and focus on the trials of Ted Bundy. And part of this is done through looking at one of his surviving victims, his fiancée, who's coming to grips with the crimes. This is a very long subplot that I think should have been really interesting and engaging, and an opportunity to explore who that character was and that duplicitous nature without making Zac Efron's Ted Bundy so front and center. It's somebody who maybe through her conversations with Haley Joel Osment, who's back and now looks like an adorable chipmunk, whose conversations could really explore who that person was. And at the end of the film, there are scenes that really intimate how she was living with somebody who was living a lie and how she was putting herself and her child in danger. But I really never felt like they explored it as they could have, and it left a little bit of me wanting for more. Additionally, everybody is talking about how Zac Efron's phenomenal in this. I actually went into this with a modicum of respect for Zac Efron. I know a lot of people make fun of him, particularly for High School Musicals and just kind of walking around shirtless. He is a good actor. I don't think he gets enough opportunities to explore that. And he's fine in this movie. I think he's even good in this movie. But like I said before about comedians in starring roles for dramas, I think to an extent the bar is lowered for them because we expect so little and we're just curious to see if they can hit the beats. And a lot of times in this film, Zac Efron has moments of greatness. He's able to visually and physically create aspects of Ted Bundy's posture, his weird toothy smile, and really evoke who Ted Bundy was, or at least what his presence was. However, what I really appreciate about the film is at the end when they show some real life scenes of Ted Bundy that they had recreated earlier, it reminded me of what I was kind of thinking all throughout, which was that while Zac Efron was good, he was still playing Ted Bundy as Zac Efron and not really hitting that strained kind of twang Ted Bundy had, a very distinct cadence and voice and pitch intonation. The rest of the cast, to me, it's a mixed bag. I knew that when I was 50-50 on the film, I started out really high and I was kind of coming back down to earth. I lost a little bit of faith when I saw John Malkovich as the court judge. I love John Malkovich. He put zero effort into looking like the real judge, which I guess I wouldn't care about if they didn't go out of their way to be so accurate. He's even sporting a goatee that the guy didn't have, and he didn't have the guy's accent or anything like that. And while I love John Malkovich, it was just John Malkovich, and he's eating up scenery and being himself. And while that's enjoyable, it did take me out of the movie a little bit. And there are some other cameos. Sheldon from Big Bang Theory is there as an attorney. I think he does a pretty good job. I've already mentioned Haley Joel Osment, who doesn't have a lot to work with, but again, does his part really well and creates for an interesting storyline that does progress the plot forward. And there's just some stupid shit like James Hetfield from Metallica being one of the cops. It's like, okay, whatever. Okay. I guess the biggest thing for me is when you are exploring a character like this, I mean, there are some really great examples of films that deal with a psychotic character. And let's not even talk about serial killers yet. There are some really good films dealing with pathological liars. I mean, William H. Macy in Fargo is a great example of a really bad criminal who just tries to lie his way out of everything, and how that pattern of lying actually becomes not just comedic, but very foreshadowing of his undoing. If you look at Matt Damon in The Informant, which I'm not a huge fan of, his performance is great, and the script really creates somebody who fabricates this entire world and lies to everyone to their face, and by the time that you as the audience catch on to it, it's both infuriating and incredibly curious. And I think that a character like that, who Ted Bundy was to a certain extent, you can do a lot more with that. And while the film does a bit about how he's so charming, you could also talk about how he's just so manipulative. And that's not really an aspect that they get into. They definitely show him as cunning, but really it's more of the way he's scheming to escape and trying to saw his way through the ceiling or jump out of a window. And those things, again, are rather two-dimensional. I mean, I don't think there's many films or many fictional stories that don't try to do those exact same beats. And maybe that's one of the biggest shortcomings of this film, is that it really does feel like fiction, even though it's so clearly not. And I think that's really more of a problem with the pattern, or at least with the structure of the movie and how it develops, more than anything else. And again, this is a director that really knows Ted Bundy, doing a documentary on him last year. Somebody who really understood him and had a message and a vision of him they wanted to get out. And in the end, as unique as the approach was to talking about Ted Bundy, I feel like I learned the least about him as a person. And had we focused more on the fiance character, for instance, I think that would have been perfectly all right. But in this case, I kind of left it feeling like, what was the point of that? And I said, we'll talk about serial killers later. Obviously, there are fantastic movies about murderous characters and their psychosis and their pathological lying and their eccentricities. We're talking about Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer here. We're talking about American Psycho, movies that I think are really layered in how they're trying to express the sheer absurdity of a character like this. And The House That Jack Built, again, being a phenomenal example of that. Somebody whose actions are shown and not judged, not positioned in a way where you have to feel a certain way, but are objectively horrible and horrifying. And while they talk about the horrible things Ted Bundy did, you still return to a smiling Zac Efron in a way that doesn't feel like a parallel to that horror, but almost like a completely different reality. And this kind of comes to one of the film's successes and yet failings, which is that at the beginning of it, look, I can suspend disbelief with the best of them. I think a great example is in Valkyrie with Tom Cruise. I know he's not going to kill Adolf Hitler, but the film is so good and so tense that halfway through it, I'm feeling like they can pull it off, and I'm rooting for him. And in this film, it does set it up in a way where, Ted Bundy killed 30 people, but at the same time, these cops are out to frame him. Everybody's out to get him. You kind of empathize with him, and that's fun for a bit. That ride is good to grip you, to grab you, to put you in that position, and definitely to empathize with the people in his life who felt the exact same way. But by the end of it, we've never really evolved. The one caveat to that, I would say, is that there is a phenomenal scene at the end of the movie that really made the experience worthwhile to me, where his fiance visits him on death row and really confronts him about the things that he'd done and trying to gain closure for her life, hearing from him that he is the person people say he is, the person that she knows he is deep down, which is such a contrast to the person that she fell in love with. And there are many great flashbacks to moments you saw of the two of them together where you realize things that seemed innocent maybe weren't so innocent, and she never knew what was going on inside of his head. And those things told visually are the kind of things that I really wish this film pulled more out of. The type of character struggle I wish we'd followed from her all throughout, as opposed to her finding Haley Joel Osment and trying to go about her life and then kind of having this closure at the end. It feels like there's two people on a collision course where by the end of it, Ted has so much momentum behind him and she's kind of an afterthought. And that was really disappointing to me. However, it is the single best use of the jail, two people separated by glass cliche you see in film that I've probably ever seen. Just a phenomenal moment, phenomenal pacing, and really well acted between the two of them. So at the end of the day, should you see this movie? Well, it's on Netflix and it's free. So unless you're looking at burning 2 hours as an investment, you're probably good to go here. If you're somebody who's really into serial killer films, I think it's a worthy contribution to the genre. I think it's definitely an interesting approach to Ted Bundy, but I still really wish that there'd been more from a character perspective. I don't feel like it goes to the direction of lionizing him and making him sort of an anti-hero. I don't think that it really fails anybody in particular. I just wish there'd been more. It just feels like an interesting retelling of events that they didn't have much to add to. And quite frankly, I almost would rather have seen the real events they show in the credits as opposed to Zac Efron recreating them and tying a narrative around that. So disappointing, I think, is the word that I would use, even coming into it not really expecting much. So in the end, if you are looking for a film to satiate your desires, well, it's not a horror film if you're looking for that. It's not quite there. There is some gore. There's not really violence. A lot of things are alluded to, and so it's still dark in that sense. It walks a fine line between true crime and a docudrama. So in that sense, if you don't know about Ted Bundy, if you want to kind of learn about him, or if you're interested enough and you've done a little bit of research, I think it's worthwhile. But if you're looking for something new, this is definitely not the film for you. So I hope that was clear enough. We've got a few more reviews coming over the next few weeks. We're going to be looking at the new sci-fi picture High Life coming out now, and talking about that this week. So get ready for that. Get excited. If you're new here and you just started subscribing to us, check out some of our old stuff. See if you like it. Check us on Twitter or on the Facebooks. I don't think we have a MySpace, but if we do, you're in our top 8 because nobody else is. Thank you for joining us once again. Be kind to your animals and just be a good person. Don't be Ted Bundy. That guy was a piece of shit.